For God's sake, don't leave me behind." The agonizing cry of Private Lorenzo Ayers echoed across the snow-covered Cheyenne village. His leg crushed in battle. Yet more shocking was the cold command from his superior: abandon him. This horrific decision on March 17, 1876, along the Powder River, wasn't just a military failure. It became the catalyst for one of America's most devastating defeats. Within just 3 months, the alliance formed in the aftermath of this betrayal would annihilate Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer at Little Bighorn in a bloodbath that shocked a nation. The agonizing scene at Powder River set the stage for the coming disaster. Behind this tragedy lay months of increasing tension between the U.S. government and the native tribes of the Northern Plains. In December 1875, President Ulysses S. Grant issued a fateful ultimatum that dramatically escalated the conflict. His directive ordered all Sioux and Northern Cheyenne living outside designated reservation boundaries to return to their assigned agencies by January 31, 1876. Any Native Americans remaining beyond reservation borders after this deadline would be classified as hostile, authorizing military action against them. This ultimatum came during the harsh winter months when travel was extremely difficult, if not impossible, for many Native families. The U.S. government showed little consideration for these practical challenges. Many Sioux and Cheyenne bands legitimately hunting in unceded territories, guaranteed by the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, found themselves suddenly branded as hostiles through no action of their own. When the January deadline passed, with many bands still outside the reservations, Generals William Tecumseh Sherman and Philip Sheridan moved quickly to implement military action. By February 1876, they had orchestrated a comprehensive 3-pronged campaign against the non-compliant tribes. The strategy reflected the military thinking that had brought Union victory during the Civil War. Coordinated, overwhelming force applied simultaneously from multiple directions. Sheridan, drawing on his experience in winter campaigns during the Civil War and earlier Indian Wars, specifically designed the operation to strike during winter months when Native communities were most vulnerable. His strategic calculation was that tribes would be less mobile, their horses weaker, and their fighting capacity diminished during the cold season. This approach deliberately targeted not just warriors, but entire communities, including women, children, and the elderly. General George Crook received orders to lead the Wyoming column of this campaign, departing from Fort Fetterman in Wyoming Territory with a substantial force. His mission was straightforward: locate and force submission of any hostile Native bands in the region. Crook's column included infantry, cavalry, supplies, and scouts, a formidable military presence in the winter landscape. On March 16th, Crook received intelligence reports about a village located ahead of his main force. Without proper verification, military leadership incorrectly identified this settlement as the camp of Crazy Horse and his Oglala Sioux followers, a high-value target for the Army. Based on this flawed information, Crook authorized approximately 400 soldiers from the 2nd and 3rd Cavalry Regiments to separate from the main column and launch an attack on the village. Colonel Joseph Reynolds, a 54-year-old officer with a mixed military record, received command of this strike force. The colonel had served in the Mexican-American War and the Civil War, but had faced criticism for past battlefield decisions. Reynolds led his men toward what they believed was Crazy Horse's camp, with explicit orders to attack and subdue any resistance. The soldiers rode through the bitter cold, prepared to strike a decisive blow against what they thought was a primary hostile force. None of them realized they were actually advancing toward a peaceful Northern Cheyenne village, a mistake that would trigger a chain of events leading directly to one of the most significant military disasters in American history. In the cold morning hours of March 17th, Colonel Reynolds directed his troops toward the Cheyenne village. The settlement consisted of approximately 100 lodges situated along the western bank of the Powder River. His force achieved complete tactical surprise, catching the village inhabitants unaware as they slept. Despite this initial advantage, Reynolds failed to capitalize on the element of surprise. His attack suffered from poor coordination and inadequate tactical command. The plan called for a two-pronged assault to encircle the village, but this strategy quickly disintegrated in execution. The cavalry units seized the village and captured most of the Cheyenne horse herd, a critical objective in Plains warfare, as horses represented both mobility and wealth. However, Reynolds's forces did not secure their position properly, leaving flanks exposed and failing to establish defensive perimeters. The Cheyenne warriors, numbering fewer than 200, quickly recovered from the initial shock. They organized a determined resistance, despite being significantly outnumbered by the 400 cavalry troops. Military maps from the engagement show cavalry units, marked in blue, with Native American scouts, indicated by blue hatchet symbols, surrounding the Cheyenne village, marked in red along the Powder River. Reynolds' tactical failures mounted as the battle progressed. His plan relied on Captain Moore leading a flanking maneuver, but Moore failed to reach his assigned position. This left a critical gap in the encirclement of the village. Captain Noyes initially dispatched Captain Egan with 47 cavalrymen armed with pistols as the first attacking force, but without the coordinated second attack, they faced unexpected resistance. The Cheyenne warriors tactically withdrew to the bluffs overlooking the village, gaining the high ground advantage. From these elevated positions, they fired down on the soldiers, effectively neutralizing the cavalry's numerical superiority. Moore's units attempted to dislodge the warriors from the bluffs, but failed repeatedly. Reynolds belatedly ordered Captain Mills' reserve unit to reinforce Egan's embattled men, but this response came too late to change the battle's momentum. The Cheyenne maintained their strategic positions on the bluffs, forcing the soldiers into defensive postures despite having initially seized the village. According to Wooden Leg, a Cheyenne warrior present at the battle, the first warning came from an elderly man who had awakened early and climbed a nearby hill for observation or prayer. Upon spotting the approaching soldiers, he shouted a warning toward the camp. "Soldiers are here! Soldiers are right here!" By this point, the attacking white soldiers had positioned themselves between the Cheyenne horse herd and the village, cutting off the primary means of escape and mobility. Chaos erupted throughout the village. Women screamed, children cried for their mothers, and elderly villagers attempted to flee from the gunfire. Warriors frantically grabbed whatever weapons they could find. Wooden Leg possessed a muzzle-loading rifle, but had no ammunition, and a borrowed revolver was already on loan to someone else. He was left with only a bow and arrows to defend his people. Despite this disadvantage, Wooden Leg circled around to reach the horse herd, capturing a horse belonging to Chief Old Bear to use as his war mount. The disparity in armaments was stark. Very few Cheyenne possessed firearms and ammunition to match the military's weaponry. Wooden Leg noted tactical details about the attacking forces. The first soldiers to appear rode white horses, while a subsequent attack force approached from another direction on purple roan mounts, indicating different cavalry units. During the confusion, Wooden Leg encountered women and children attempting to escape and helped 2 children onto his horse. After bringing them to safety, he returned to join the fight alongside fellow warriors 2 Moons and Bear Walks on a ridge. The battle intensified with individual acts of bravery on both sides. 2 Moons performed a spiritual ritual with his repeating rifle before firing at a soldier but missed his target. Bear Walks on a ridge proved more effective, shooting a U.S. soldier in the back of the head with his muzzle-loading rifle. Following this, 3 Cheyenne warriors, including Wooden Leg, rushed forward to kill the fallen soldier and capture his rifle and blue coat, valuable spoils of war. Despite their spirited defense, the Cheyenne suffered casualties. 1 warrior was killed, another suffered a broken arm, and a man named Braided Locks sustained a gunshot wound to his cheek. Eventually, the warriors were pushed back from the camp area. From a distance, the displaced Cheyenne watched their village burn as ammunition and gunpowder exploded in the flames. The destruction was complete. Lodges, food stores, winter robes, and personal possessions all reduced to ashes. In a single morning, the Cheyenne had been rendered destitute, losing virtually all their material possessions in the attack. The battle demonstrated how tactical failures by military leadership could undermine overwhelming advantages in numbers and firepower. It also revealed the remarkable adaptability and courage of Cheyenne warriors who organized an effective resistance despite the surprise attack and inferior weaponry. The battle along the Powder River raged for approximately 5 hours. As the morning turned to afternoon, the U.S. cavalry began sustaining casualties from the persistent Cheyenne counterattack from the bluffs. The tactical situation had deteriorated significantly from what Colonel Reynolds had anticipated. Facing mounting injuries among his men and concerned about losing the captured horse herd, Reynolds issued the order to retreat. This decision came despite the fact that his forces still held numerical superiority and controlled the village site. His primary stated concern was the potential loss of the captured Cheyenne horses, which military doctrine considered essential to deny mobility to the opposing force. During the hasty withdrawal, one of the most tragic episodes of the engagement occurred. Private Lorenzo Ayers lay in the village with his leg severely fractured during the fighting. Unable to move, Ayers called out to his retreating comrades, begging them not to abandon him. His pleas echoed across the battlefield. "For God's sake, don't leave me behind." When officers reported Ayers' situation to Colonel Reynolds, the commander made a cold calculation. Reynolds refused to send men back, stating that doing so would reignite the fighting and potentially cause additional casualties. He ordered the withdrawal to continue, effectively condemning Ayers to death. This decision would later feature prominently in the official report and subsequent military inquiry. Reynolds' retreat also featured another significant tactical error. The cavalry failed to adequately secure the captured Cheyenne horse herd during their withdrawal. This oversight would soon prove costly, as it undermined one of the primary objectives of the operation. As the U.S. forces pulled back, the Cheyenne cautiously returned to their destroyed village. Among the burned lodges, they discovered something unexpected. One teepee remained standing intact. Inside, they found an elderly blind woman who had been left behind during the chaos but remained unharmed by the soldiers. The Cheyenne interpreted this as an act of deliberate mercy by the military forces. Wooden Leg and other Cheyenne accounts noted that this incident caused them to reflect that the soldiers have good hearts too, despite the destruction they had inflicted. This nuanced understanding of their opponents reveals the complex perspective of the Cheyenne, who recognized individual acts of humanity even in the midst of conflict. Taking advantage of the poorly guarded horse herd, Cheyenne warriors stealthily approached the retreating cavalry and managed to recapture a significant portion of their horses. This success partially mitigated the immediate impact of the attack, restoring some mobility to the displaced community. Those who recovered horses quickly put them to use, helping the most vulnerable. Warriors and young men with mounts returned to assist women, children, and elderly tribal members who were struggling to escape the destroyed village on foot. This communal response highlighted the social cohesion that helped the Cheyenne survive the crisis. Chief Old Bear exemplified this spirit of sacrifice. When Wooden Leg returned his horse to him, the chief immediately gave it to his wife to ride while he continued on foot despite his age and status. This practical leadership, by example, characterized the response of Cheyenne leaders throughout the crisis. The displaced Cheyenne began a difficult journey eastward and northward, crossing the Little Powder River under harsh conditions. The March weather remained bitterly cold, the ground muddy and difficult to traverse. Without adequate supplies, shelter, or food, the tribe faced immediate hardship as they traveled. Women carried what few possessions they had salvaged, along with small children. Older children walked alongside adults, while the elderly struggled to keep pace. The U.S. military's failure to protect its captured prizes allowed the Cheyenne a fighting chance at survival. Had Reynolds properly secured the horse herd, the aftermath might have been significantly more deadly for the displaced tribe. This tactical error by the cavalry commander would have strategic implications far beyond this single engagement. The cold calculation to abandon Private Ayers reflected a callousness that contrasted sharply with the community-centered response of the Cheyenne to protect their most vulnerable members. These opposing approaches to warfare and group survival would continue to characterize the conflict between native tribes and U.S. forces throughout the coming months. On the fourth day of their arduous journey, the displaced Cheyenne reached an Oglala Sioux encampment. This camp included 3 or 4 Oglala lodges that had previously been stationed near the Cheyenne village before the attack. The relationship between these neighboring bands now took on critical importance for the survivors' future. The Oglala Sioux received the Cheyenne refugees with remarkable hospitality despite their own limited resources. Crazy Horse, the renowned Oglala war leader, personally extended aid to the displaced people. He and other Oglala chiefs offered food, shelter, and protection to the exhausted Cheyenne families who arrived with few possessions and diminished numbers of horses. A formal council convened between Cheyenne and Oglala leaders to discuss the attack and determine their next course of action. The council analyzed the tactical significance of the Powder River attack and concluded that the U.S. military had initiated a broader campaign against non-reservation tribes. The deliberations were practical and strategic, focusing on how to ensure survival and potentially mount an effective resistance. The council reached a unanimous decision. Both tribes would travel northeast together to join forces with the Hunkpapa Sioux led by Sitting Bull. This decision represented a significant strategic shift, as it would concentrate Native military power rather than maintaining scattered, vulnerable bands. The Powder River attack had demonstrated the danger of isolation. Before departing, the Oglala made a substantial material contribution to the alliance. They loaned horses to the Cheyenne to ensure that no one would have to travel on foot. This practical assistance significantly increased the mobility and morale of the combined group. It also demonstrated the Oglala commitment to the new partnership through tangible sacrifice of valuable resources. Upon reaching Sitting Bull's camp, the Cheyenne encountered an impressive sight. The Hunkpapa encampment dwarfed both the Oglala and Cheyenne camps combined, with hundreds of lodges arranged in traditional circle formations. The size of this gathering indicated Sitting Bull's substantial influence and the growing concentration of native resistance. Sitting Bull's people welcomed the newcomers with remarkable generosity. They provided lodges, horses, buffalo robes, and weapons to the Cheyenne. This material support rapidly restored the combat effectiveness of the Cheyenne warriors who had lost nearly everything in the Reynolds attack. The sharing of resources created mutual obligation and strengthened intertribal bonds. The formal alliance of these 3 tribes, Northern Cheyenne, Oglala Sioux, and Hunkpapa Sioux, created one of the largest gatherings of Plains Indians in history. They agreed to travel and camp together, share resources, and coordinate military actions. The combined force included several thousand people, with perhaps 1,000 warriors capable of coordinated military action. Historians have identified the Powder River fight as the direct catalyst for this powerful alliance. What Colonel Reynolds intended as a devastating blow against Native resistance instead generated unprecedented unity among previously semi-autonomous bands. This unintended consequence represents one of the most significant strategic backfires in American military history. The alliance's military effectiveness became apparent within months. On June 17, 1876, this combined force engaged General George Crook's troops at the Battle of the Rosebud, forcing his column to retreat and preventing his planned rendezvous with other Army units. Just 8 days later, on June 25th, they annihilated Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and much of the 7th Cavalry at Little Bighorn. Both victories stemmed directly from the enhanced coordination, intelligence sharing, and combined fighting force made possible by the alliance formed after Powder River. Anthropologist Margot Liberty, drawing on Dr. Marquis's work documenting Wooden Leg's account, argued that the Powder River attack effectively constituted a declaration of war against the Cheyenne. She noted that travel arrangements within the alliance prioritized Cheyenne mobility, suggesting they were recognized as the primary force actively fighting against white encroachment. The Cheyenne themselves maintained this perspective. Many Cheyenne accounts describe Little Bighorn as primarily their battle, with Sioux warriors providing essential support and additional numbers. Their central role in the fighting reflected both their recent losses at Powder River and their resulting determination to resist further attacks. For all 3 tribes, the Powder River attack clarified their relationship with the U.S. government and military. It established unmistakable battle lines. Those wishing to avoid conflict needed to report to agencies and reservations, while those who left or avoided the reservations understood they were joining actively hostile groups. This clarity hardened resistance among those who chose to remain free, but also increased pressure on neutral or undecided bands to accept reservation life. The strategic implications of this alliance formation illustrate how a tactical military action like Reynolds's attack could generate far-reaching unintended consequences. What began as an attempt to punish and subdue a single village created instead a military coalition capable of inflicting the most significant defeat ever suffered by the U.S. Army in the Plains Indian Wars. The military implications of the Powder River engagement extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. Military analysts noted striking parallels between this battle and the November 1868 Washita Battle, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. Both operations featured morning surprise attacks on native villages, village destruction, and horse herd capture as core tactical objectives. Despite these similarities, the outcomes differed dramatically. At Washita, Custer successfully encircled the village, captured numerous prisoners, and prevented warriors from nearby camps from effectively organizing a counterattack. Custer had also ordered the destruction of the captured horse herd, recognizing that denial of mobility to the enemy outweighed the potential value of the horses themselves. Reynolds, by contrast, failed in nearly every tactical objective beyond the initial surprise. A military correspondent bluntly criticized what he called Reynolds' ignorance in allowing 200 naked warriors to effectively defeat 400 well-equipped soldiers. This assessment highlighted not just numerical disparity, but the competence gap between the opposing forces. Reynolds compounded his tactical failures with logistical ones. He ordered the burning of captured supplies instead of preserving them for his hungry troops as instructed. This decision directly contradicted General Crook's specific orders to secure provisions, as the expedition was already facing supply shortages. The horse herd management represented another critical failure. One officer had explicitly warned Reynolds that losing the captured horses would mean losing the battle. Records indicate General Crook had stated he would rather lose cavalry horses than lose Indian ponies, understanding the strategic importance of denying mobility to native forces. Reynolds' inadequate security allowed the Cheyenne to recapture many of their horses, fundamentally undermining the operation's objectives. Wooden Leg's account of a wounded soldier abandoned during the retreat almost certainly referred to Private Lorenzo Ayers. This abandonment highlighted a troubling pattern. Custer himself had faced similar accusations after the Washita battle, where Major Joel Elliott and his men were left behind and killed. The parallel put a spotlight on command decisions about when to retrieve wounded men under fire versus when to withdraw to protect the larger force. General Crook's reaction to Reynolds's performance reflected deep disappointment. Crook had expected a decisive victory. That would demoralize non-reservation tribes and compel their surrender. Instead, Reynolds's actions were deemed unpardonable by military standards. The failures transformed what should have been a demonstration of military superiority into evidence of incompetence. Formal charges against Reynolds accumulated quickly. He faced accusations of neglect of duty for failing to employ his full force effectively, destroying supplies needed by his troops, and losing hundreds of captured horses. Private Ayers' death featured prominently in these charges, with the abandonment of a wounded soldier representing a profound breach of military ethics. One lieutenant's testimony proved particularly damaging. He wrote that the Army had withdrawn too hastily, leaving behind both dead soldiers and one man alive to fall into the hands of the enemy and be cut to pieces. And this graphic description inflamed public and military opinion against Reynolds. Reynolds attempted to deflect blame by filing countercharges against two subordinate commanders. This defensive posture further damaged his reputation within military circles, suggesting an unwillingness to accept command responsibility. By April 1876, newspapers across the country carried accounts of the Powder River Battle and its aftermath. The public narrative focused on military incompetence and the abandonment of Private Ayers. These stories placed intense pressure on the Army command structure to demonstrate better leadership in future engagements. The officers of the 7th Cavalry, including Custer, undoubtedly followed these reports as they prepared to depart Fort Abraham Lincoln in May. The Reynolds affair provided a stark reminder of how battlefield failure could instantly destroy a military career. This awareness likely influenced tactical decision-making, perhaps pushing commanders toward more aggressive actions to avoid any appearance of hesitation or retreat. General Alfred Terry's instructions to Custer before the Little Bighorn campaign specifically emphasized the imperative to hold on to your wounded, a direction that directly addressed the Reynolds controversy. This explicit order indicates how prominently the Ayers abandonment figured in military thinking just months after Powder River. The rumors and drama surrounding the Reynolds affair almost certainly affected Custer's psychology before Little Bighorn. Having previously faced criticism for abandoning Major Elliott at Washita, Custer would have been particularly sensitive to any suggestion of leaving men behind or conducting an inadequate attack. The military justice process for Reynolds bears comparison to the Court of Inquiry convened to investigate Major Marcus Reno's actions at Little Bighorn. Both proceedings examined command decisions under fire and the obligations officers held toward their men in crisis situations. Perhaps most damning was Private Lorenzo Ayers' death certificate. The official document starkly recorded the cause of death as body left on battlefield by order of commander of expedition, directly implicating Colonel Reynolds in Ayers' death. This bureaucratic record transformed what might have been seen as an unfortunate battlefield necessity into an act of official abandonment. The Powder River battle, though a relatively minor engagement in terms of casualties and scale, produced consequences far out of proportion to its size. It exposed significant weaknesses in U.S. Army command structure and tactical execution. More importantly, it drove the Northern Cheyenne into alliance with the Sioux, creating a formidable combined force. The failures at Powder River sowed bloody lessons, but whether Custer and his command genuinely learned from them before the tragedy at Little Bighorn remains one of history's haunting questions. The ultimate irony lies in how Reynolds' attempt to strike a decisive blow against Native resistance instead strengthened it. By abandoning Private Ayers and failing to secure the captured horses, Reynolds not only lost the immediate battle, but helped create the conditions for a much larger defeat. The Powder River engagement thus stands as a powerful example of how tactical failures can generate strategic disasters, a lesson the U.S. Army would learn again at far greater cost just 3 months later at Little Bighorn.